And we're bringing you this class on the way forward for Pennsylvania's energy sector. I'm not sure how many people know, but Pennsylvania is the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases in the US. And we're also regionally one of the largest sources for electricity, not just our state, but for the region. So what we do here in Pennsylvania's state capital matters far beyond our borders. So I'm really pleased to introduce Liz Robinson, who's going to be our speaker today. Liz is a member of the Central Philadelphia Monthly Meeting. She founded the Energy Coordinating Agency in Philadelphia and the Keystone Energy Efficiency Alliance. That's a trade association for energy efficiency in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. She has also helped the energy co-op transition to renewables, and she is now the director of the Philadelphia Solar Energy Association. And on a personal note, Linda and I have gotten to know Liz particularly through our environmental radio show. She has been kind enough to be our Harrisburg energy correspondent. And we've been very impressed with Liz's depth of knowledge and her passion for justice. And today she will be telling us about the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. And it's about a carbon market that Pennsylvania is poised to join. So thank you so much, Liz, for talking with us today. And unmute Liz.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me. Yeah, it's also been great to get to know Kay and Linda through Planet Philly. And I used to attend Chestnut Hill monthly meeting, but I don't recognize many of you. So glad to meet you all this morning. And a few members of the Eco Justice Collaborative are here. Ruth Darlington from Medford Meeting in New Jersey is here. So one of the things that I'm also a member of is the Eco Justice Collaborative. It's a collaborative of the PYM, and we're working together on climate change and related issues. It's a marvelous group of people. But I'm going to share some slides with you. So I'm going to speak for about 15 minutes, and several of you know quite a bit about RGGI, and then just open it up for conversation, question and answer. And Eileen Flanagan, of course, knows a lot about RGGI as well. So several of us can respond to your questions. And I'd like to make this very informal since it's such a small group and since it's early on a Sunday morning. So we'll just have a conversation here. So I'm going to share my screen and jump into these slides. So if that's okay with you, I'm just going to leave the rest of the slides showing on the left side. If that's is that a problem, or how does that work? How does that look to you guys?
I think it's fine as long as you can read the text on the slide, which I can easily.
Okay. I guess the images are blocking, right? So maybe I'll just open it up. Is that better? Okay. So Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, or RGGI, is a carbon market. And there are many ways to monetize carbon. You can tax carbon. We already have a carbon tax in the form of a tax on gasoline. We've had it for many, many years. And, you know, if there are any questions about which way is better, I'm happy to respond to those. You can also do it through cap and trade. You can do it through cap and invest or cap and dividend. So of these four major ways of doing things, RGGI is number 2 and 3. So RGGI is both a cap and trade and a cap and invest program. And as Kay said, the importance of doing this for Pennsylvania is that we are a really large emitter. This is about 10 years old, but the ranking order hasn't changed too much. So we're behind Texas and California, and we're certainly the largest emitter on the East Coast. So we're a major contributor to climate change. This graph shows where the emissions are by sector, and the pie chart on the left here is national, and then the chart on the right is state level. So you may have a little difficulty seeing this, but they're very similar. And I like these because they're so simple. You know, they're really clear. So nationally, transportation and electricity are very close, followed by industry. But in Pennsylvania, industry, which is this gray chunk here, you may not be able to see it fully, is the largest, followed by electricity and then transportation. And then buildings, the building sector is this sector here called residential commercial. And that's about 11 to 12% of our emissions. And then agriculture is its own wedge, and that's a big chunk. So the importance of understanding this is to see that in order for us to clean all our emissions, we have to clean the electricity sector, because electricity is the key to being able to clean everything else. So we're starting with the electricity sector, and then we can, at the same time, we can clean transportation by electrifying transportation, and we can begin to clean industry and our buildings. So cleaning the electricity, moving from dirty to clean electricity is the key, and we have to start here. This slide's really important, so you know, you might want to move your images over so you can see it. So RGGI is the nation's oldest carbon market. It's also the largest, so it connects every state. It's a regional framework, and every state from Maine to Virginia now is part of RGGI, except for Pennsylvania. And Pennsylvania by itself generates 81 million tons of carbon every year. When we join, we will double the size of RGGI, because 81 million tons is actually more than every other RGGI state combined. So once Pennsylvania is part of RGGI, we will be capturing a lot more of the carbon on the East Coast and monetizing that resource. So what happens when you adopt a carbon market? What are the impacts? What are the economic and health impacts? A really excellent study was done just recently by the Acadia Center, and these are kind of the top level findings. They found that carbon emissions fell in the RGGI states by 47%, while falling at much lower rates in the rest of the country. Electricity prices actually fell in RGGI states by 5.7%, while going up in the rest of the country by 8.5% or 8.6%. The economies of the RGGI states grew faster than they did in the rest of the country. And RGGI, as I'll explain in a minute, generates revenue. And as it generates that revenue, it generated $3.2 billion in auction allowance proceeds. And the majority of that has been reinvested in energy efficiency and renewable energy. So RE here stands for renewable energy. And this is a really big, important, you know, I don't think this is really appreciated well, but RGGI improves both environment and health. And those two things are really almost two sides of the same coin. We're learning much more now about how human health and health of animals and, you know, just the natural world in general is improved when we clean our air. So the environmental benefits and health benefits go together, and it's almost $6 billion of improvement in the dark green RGGI states. So how are we joining RGGI in Pennsylvania? We will do it in a unique way. All of the other RGGI states have joined legislatively, And we're not able to do that. As you all, I'm sure, are aware, we have a legislature in Pennsylvania and Harrisburg that's dominated. Both parties are have a majority of Republicans, and frankly, the natural gas industry has quite a grip on the legislature. So it is not possible to do this legislatively. So Governor Wolf, back almost a year ago now, about 10 months ago, initiated this process. And it is possible to do this administratively in Pennsylvania because of the strength of our state constitution. We have something called an environmental rights amendment in our constitution, which guarantees to every Pennsylvanian the right to clean air, pure water, and the actual language is much longer than this, but it boils down to a stable environment. So the governor instructed the Department of Environmental Protection to draft regulations consistent with the RGGI market. So it's called, the exact lingo here is called a carbon trading program. And when you go on the DEP website, you'll see that language. So technically, we're not joining RGGI, we are participating in RGGI. So this is one of the DEP's graphics, and it does a nice job of kind of summarizing the whole thing. So as I mentioned, RGGI is every state from Maine to Virginia. Virginia is the most recent one to join, so it's actually not on here yet. And the way that RGGI works is it caps emissions. It sets a cap. That's why it's called a cap and trade or cap and invest program. And that's an absolute key. The key to getting emissions under control is the cap. So it caps emissions, it reduces that cap every year, and monetizes those emissions. And so just kind of following this around in a clockwise manner, the projection is that RGGI will reduce our emissions by 26% in the next, really, you'll see it's very, very quickly. So by 2025, RGGI will reduce our greenhouse gas emissions from this sector by 26%, putting us on track to reach the governor's overall goal of 80% reduction by 2050. Now, this is not a goal that we should, frankly, this is becoming inconsistent with climate science. We need to reach 80% earlier than 2050, but for the DEP, just remember the structure the state looks at, this is currently the goal, is 80% reduction by 2050. So what's happened so far is the DEP regulations have been drafted, they've been presented to the Pennsylvania Environmental Quality Board, which is the decision-making body. The EQB has approved those and has opened a process which will take almost a year. And that process starts with review, a legal review by the Attorney General. He has completed that review. And then that opens up a 60-day public comment period. And that's where we are right now. We're in the 60-day public comment period. So if everything goes well and there are no hiccups or surprises along the way, we can implement RGGI a year from this coming January. So it's January of 2022. So this is actually the most important slide, and I'll just kind of walk through this one step at a time. So the way this works is you cap emissions, you lower the cap in RGGI by at least 3% a year. In Pennsylvania, we will be lowering our cap faster than that. Some years by almost 5%. So our emissions cap will be coming down at a very steady rate. One thing to look at here is carbon will decline very quickly, moving from 78 million tons, which is our starting point, that's where the cap is going to be set, to 58 million tons by 2030. This is how carbon gets monetized. So right now, if you generate carbon when you, if you produce carbon when you generate electricity, sorry, you can do that for free. So you can dump all your carbon in the atmosphere. It's like a garbage can, you know, you can just dump it. Under a carbon market, you can no longer do that. So now you will have to pay to pollute. And the metric is for every ton of carbon dioxide, you have to purchase one allowance. So 1 ton equals 1 allowance. And how do you determine this price? The way RGGI does it is through quarterly public auction. And RGGI Inc. is a nonprofit corporation which administers RGGI. So RGGI Inc. Opens up public auctions every quarter. And right now, a ton of CO2 is trading in the RGGI market for $6.82. So as many of you know, the social cost of carbon is 10 times that. But in the RGGI market, carbon trades at $6.82. It's very cheap. Allowances can be traded or retired. So let me give you an example here. If you are in Pennsylvania, there are still several coal plants. And let's say one of them decided that the handwriting on the wall is very clear. Coal is dead, has no future. So I'm going to get rid of coal. I want to stay in the electricity market. So I'm going to switch from coal to solar. And I make this switch after I've already purchased my allowances for the year. So now I'm sitting on a bunch of allowances that I don't need. So I'm going to sell those in the next quarterly auction. I'll put them on the auction block and I'll sell these allowances that I no longer need. So that's the way the trading works in this market. And the market is regional. It's not just one state. So when, I'll go into that, so back to this slide showing you our cap is 78 million tons. Each ton will trade at $6.82. So to get a sense of how much revenue RGGI will generate, you would multiply 78 million tons by $6.82. If you do that in your head quickly, you realize this is a pile of money. So the first year, RGGI will be throwing off somewhere around $400 million. It's actually more than that, but it'll depend on the price of carbon at the time. So just using that as a round number, where is this $400 million going to go? The $400 million, the RGGI revenue, will go to the state of Pennsylvania. And the law, the body of law that we're following in Pennsylvania is called the Clean Air Act. This is the Pennsylvania Clean Air Act, not the national one. And in Pennsylvania, that act requires that 100% of the proceeds from enforcing the act must be invested to clean our air. So how do we do that? These are the principal ways that we can do it through the Clean Air Act. We can invest in energy efficiency. We can invest in renewable energy, workforce development and training specific to these industries can be, it's not just broadly workforce development and training, but workforce development and training specific to these industries can be funded through RGGI proceeds. We can invest in clean transportation, which can include public transit, electric vehicle fueling infrastructure, and the like. We can invest in carbon sequestration. Carbon sequestration, turns out, in soil is the largest, it's the best way to do it, frankly. It's the most cost-effective and the most secure. It's the most reliable way to do it. So you can also sequester carbon in trees, and there are many other ways to do it. But the mechanical ways that you hear about a lot of the time, giant machines sucking carbon out of the atmosphere and sticking it in an abandoned coal mine. Those ways of sequestering carbon, frankly, tend to be very, very, very expensive. But it is possible to sequester carbon in natural ways very cost effectively. Carbon mitigation, there are many simple things that we still haven't done in Pennsylvania. For example, we have not capped all the abandoned coal mines. So those are just leaching, methane and other forms of carbon dioxide. So what will happen if we do this? What are the results of this going to be? So the DEP, to answer that question, the DEP hired a very well-known firm, ICF, and the modeling that they did assumed that 40% was invested in energy efficiency, 35% in renewable energy, and 25% in clean transportation, sequestration, and other forms. And what they found is that RGGI will generate 67,000 new jobs. This is net new jobs. There will be a tiny bit of job loss, but this is net new jobs. It will expand Pennsylvania's economy, gross state product by almost $2 billion in the next 10 years. It will save money for the average person. It will save lives, 639 lives. It will reduce the severity of asthma and other respiratory illness. Goes on and on, providing over $6 billion in health benefits in the next 10 years. And it can, if we target the revenues at low income and environmental justice communities, it can reduce the burden on those communities significantly. So it can have very significant social impacts as well as economic and health and job creation impacts. So as Kay mentioned, there's a public comment period right now, and I would really, really encourage everyone to take advantage of that. And there are many ways you can do it. You can testify in an upcoming public hearing, like Eileen and I are doing. You can submit written testimony, and you can do that in a lot of ways. You can email comments, you can mail in written comments, or you can sign on to a support letter. And I'd be happy to send that to anyone after this webinar. And for more information, I put up here the DEP website. DEP, there's tons and tons of really good information on this site. So if you're really keen to understand RGGI in more detail, please check into the DEP's website. So let's open it up to questions.
I just wondered, this is a small question, what is an environmental justice community?
So EJ communities are, it came out of, I think the Obama administration defined them in order to give money to underserved communities. So there is a definition. It's a combination of two things. It's a combination of income. So it's relatively low income communities, and it's also a minority. So the density of minority population and or low income. So they don't have to be minority communities, that can just be very, very low income communities and vice versa. So for example, there's a map. If you want to see where they are in Pennsylvania or any state, you can just go to that state's, I suppose the environmental department in every state is where you would find the map. But in Pennsylvania, they tend to cluster in Philly, Delaware County. There are parts of Western PA where there are a lot of EJ communities, and they're sprinkled all across the state. So EJ communities, there's a lot of them in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is a state that has relatively low median income, and certain parts of the state have high density of minority population. So that's where they're clustered across the state. And I will say that DEP really wants to serve what they are calling EJ communities through RGGI. They see RGGI as a tremendous tool and opportunity to address environmental problems in EJ communities.
Thank you.
Sure.
I'm curious what the mechanism is for the electricity prices falling.
Oh, sure. I didn't explain that well. That's a key issue. So they're really, so when you put a price on carbon in Pennsylvania, specifically what's going to happen is the 3 remaining coal plants will retire immediately. And on the basis of the fact that RGGI's already been announced, they have scheduled themselves. They have, the owners of those plants have moved those plants into the retirement schedule. Interestingly, one of those companies, First Energy, took a nuclear plant that they had already scheduled for retirement out of the retirement schedule. So what RGGI will do to different fuels is illustrated very clearly right there. So RGGI will support any fuel that does not generate carbon. And the nuclear industry is desperate to have some support for their nuclear plants, which have become uneconomic as natural gas has gotten cheap. It's been really tough on the nuclear industry. So RGGI will support nuclear power, perhaps preserving existing plants from early retirement, and it will force coal into early retirement. It will not have that same impact on gas. So this price, the $6.82, will principally be borne by the gas industry. So the price of natural gas will go up an itty bitty bit. It's like 8 cents per month, I think, per average customer. So there is a price impact. There is a cost impact of RGGI on the price of natural gas. However, there are 2 ways that RGGI will bring that cost down below the 8 cents per month. One is RGGI in Pennsylvania, if we're talking $400 million a year, the projections that I've seen are that at least $150 million a year will be spent on energy efficiency. So every customer who participates in a RGGI program will see sharp reductions to their bill. And those reductions will depend on the program, but they could be anywhere from 10 to 40% reduction. So if you participate in a RGGI program as a customer, you're going to see your costs go down. And RGGI is not electricity conservation, it is carbon conservation. So just remember that RGGI is not, it's not really an energy program per se, it's a carbon program. So RGGI is going to be funding things that have never been funded before in Pennsylvania. So that's number one. And then number 2 is, and this is kind of economics 101. I'm not an economist, but I took econ in college, and supply and demand. So as the as we conserve more energy, we are lowering the demand for energy. When you lower the demand for a commodity, the price comes down. So this is an effect called DRIPE, D-R-I-P-E. And in the universe of energy efficiency programs, when you roll out energy conservation at scale, there's a direct response to the price, and the price comes down. So that's how RGGI brings down energy prices for everyone. So you'll get a big boost if you participate in a program, but you'll get a small boost just by, being in a RGGI state. Yes, Steve.
I was interested the way you distinguished Pennsylvania's entry into this from other states,
Mm-hmm.
in it just being what I would call being done administratively through the governor's office and DEP.
Mm-hmm.
Say the next governor is of the other party and the state legislature comes to hate this because they're controlled by oil and gas. What will they do to try to block this so that it's structured out of our government and we can't get to it even the way Governor Wolf wants to?
It is possible for a governor who's hostile to RGGI to undo it. But the reality is, And if you have been paying attention to markets, you have seen in the last 4 months a dramatic signal globally from markets that fossil fuel is out of favor. Fossil fuel, all forms of fossil fuel, used to be a very stable investment, rock solid investment. People would put their money in fossil fuel because it was a very predictable return. That has completely changed. The opposite is true. The return from fossil fuel now is very uncertain. It's very volatile, and smart investors have turned their back on fossil fuel. And they have embraced clean energy. Clean energy in the markets is now ascendant, and that will not change. There is nothing any governor can do to change that. So the legislature would be going against they'd be going against the wishes of their constituents. All of the polling has shown that 81% of Pennsylvanians want Pennsylvania to join RGGI. So there's the overwhelming, in both parties, overwhelming support for a carbon market in the state. And, frankly, I predict once RGGI is in place, which will happen in 2022, the programs that RGGI is supporting and the job creation that RGGI will do is so powerful. You would be committing political suicide in this state to go against it. So the time is on the governor's side. He has enough time to completely change the political calculus of this issue in the state. But I will say that's why it is so important for the public to support RGGI now. As you know, our legislature is heavily supported, and many would say in the pocket of the gas industry, and they have been trying since RGGI was announced, even before the governor. They've been trying to scuttle it already. They've passed a bill 2022, was passed in both chambers, and the governor had to veto it. They brought it back again in a slightly different form, and then the governor had to veto it again. So they also can create mischief along this pathway. The pathway for approval has one step that does bring it before the legislature, and they can attempt to scuttle it then. But that's why, again, the environmental community is trying very, very hard now to educate people and inform everyone that this is happening. The media has not covered RGGI, so you don't hear about it. The Inquirer, I don't think, has written a single story about it. So it's very, it's something that most people are not hearing about. But it's critically important that people support RGGI now.
I share the 9-year urgency hanging over us in terms of carbon, but then there's also questions about how we do things and who benefits most and how justice is enacted. And this is a lot of money for people to fight over.
Oh, yeah.
So I wonder if you could say something about how you think we should make sure that the money does help to serve the communities that are most in need economically, whether it's the jobs or the energy savings or access to, smaller scale solar, even though it's less efficient, but also in getting plants closed in those communities. Like, what are the mechanisms that you see people should be using to make sure that justice stays part of the conversation?
Well, separate from this current public hearing process, the 60-day window, the DEP will open up later a separate process for input on how to use the RGGI revenue. And I think it's critically important. Really, I've spent my life designing and administering principally energy efficiency programs and secondarily solar. And all the work I did at ECA was targeted to low-income communities. So I know a lot of the nitty-gritty. And, I know that most policymakers don't know the nitty gritty. Honestly, they know policy, but they don't know exactly how to translate that into reality. And I think it's really important for practitioners, people who not only care about this, people on all levels, to really think through, how do we make this happen? Because to be frank, climate change is bearing down so rapidly on everyone. And, on top of that, we've had the pandemic and this, very widespread and structural unemployment. A lot of these jobs will not come back. So it is critically important that we think through, how do we create a, a, a very, very durable workforce development and training track that enables low-income people, minorities, to get right into the energy efficiency industry and the solar industry. And how do we do that structurally, using the structure of the state, so that we're creating a permanent pathway. And frankly, all of this has to be done very rapidly, because, as I mentioned, Reggie will throw off $400 million in 2022. So that means in 2022, we'll have to spend $400 million. All right, that's a lot. It's a lot of money, and believe me, I've been through this rodeo. So it's very important to do a lot of planning in advance so that you can utilize those funds very well and get the maximum benefit. There are programs that need to be changed right now at the federal level. So there's a lot of thinking that has not been done yet, and a lot of planning. So I encourage everyone to, to kind of jump in as